Good morning. It's great to see such a good crowd here for today's event. My name is Scott Snyder. I'm the president and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute of America, and we are absolutely delighted to be able to co-host today's event on nuclear energy leadership for AI-driven growth and energy security. And especially because I'm working with two old friends to co-sponsor. Florence Lee and Professor Huang. And so we're delighted to be working with the Global America Business Institute and the International Nuclear Nonproliferation and Cooperation Center today. And of course, Florence was an alumnus of the Korea Economic Institute before she went off and started GABI, which has been a raging success. So we're delighted to be working with her. We've also just completed a successful collaboration with the Council of Korean Americans that featured a conversation with Song-Yi Yoon, who has had an extraordinary career in the AI sector. We had that program last week, and we're very soon going to be uploading that conversation on our YouTube channel for those who might be interested. So we're really looking forward to continuing our focus on AI and our conversations on that topic today. These days, we know that global energy demand is increasing in the context of artificial intelligence revolution, and that as energy needs and energy consumption estimates are increasing, this is a topic that's getting a lot more attention. Data center energy consumption in the U.S. is expected to grow by 120% in the U.S. compared to 2024. And we're going to have two panels today. Our first panel is going to explore the dynamics around these AI-driven growth developments. And the second session will further examine energy needs of the AI data centers and the appeal of nuclear energy as a source for AI power generation, as well as U.S.-Korea collaboration to address challenges and solutions in this area. But before we get started, I want to invite Florence to come and make some welcome remarks, and then we'll move on to the panel.
Good morning and Happy New Year. I think I can still say Happy New Year. It's January, right? Happy New Year to you all. Welcome and thanks for joining our workshop co-hosted by KEI and GABI. And I am especially thrilled to work with KEI since I'm, as you mentioned, alumni. I worked at KEI for nearly 20 years, 19 years and 9 months to be exact. So I'm just thrilled that the first program of the year is co-hosted by KEI. So thanks to Scott, Jennifer, and KEI staff for working so closely with us to make this program very affordable and organized, and looking forward to it. These days we talk about AI and how it's changing our lives and transforming everything. How it changes how we work, how the business is running, how the countries and companies are competing globally. But it is getting more attention, and it's becoming clearer. This transformation is a very energy intensive, and it's a reality. So AI is no longer, it's not just a data collection or digital system. It is a technology that is energy intensive, that demands and that requires a tremendous amount of electricity. And the power needs to be reliable, sustainable, clean, and affordable. And that's why we are here. And today's discussion matters. Nuclear energy is no longer the conversation in this clean energy space. Nuclear energy is becoming a focal point, how it can support and provide enough energy for the exponentially growing data and AI and data center energy growth. And there comes the challenges, of course. And the U.S. and Korea are here. It raised the question how both countries can work together to meet this challenge and overcome the challenge, but at the same time, seize the opportunities together that's ahead. And with that, I am very excited to hear from our speakers and learn from them. So let's just dive right into a program that what I'm sure to be very exciting, fun, right? You guys gonna make this fun? Absolutely. Fun, engaging, and insightful discussions. So thank you very much and welcome again.
So thank you very much for some excellent opening remarks. My name is Nils Osterberg. I'm with KI here in DC, and I want to start by welcoming all of you as well to what I hope will be a fun and interesting conversation today. It's going to be two panels, and the first one is named Global Perspectives on AI Demand and Energy Needs. We've already heard a little bit today about those demands, but just to put it a little bit into perspective on the global scene as well, demand for data centers and computational power are expected to triple by 2030. And it will require investments upwards of $7 trillion to meet those needs globally. And a lot of this expansion is not distributed equally around the globe, but a lot of it is actually concentrated to the US and China, as many of you in the room already know. And along with GPUs, electricity and power are crucial inputs to data centers. And so with that, global consumption is also expected to grow very rapidly, consumption of electricity. And putting it into perspective of global economies, only US, China, and India would consume more than what is predicted to be consumed by data centers by 2030. And so this poses a lot of challenges to energy systems across the world and electrical grids globally and here in the US. And so with that, I am thrilled to welcome two of our speakers today, William Fork and Robin Gaster. William Fork is a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman and a recognized expert in international nuclear and energy law, advising energy companies on a wide range of issues. He is an expert in international nuclear power plant projects, international nuclear treaties, and agreements related to the construction, operation, and fueling of nuclear facilities. He has served as general counsel for a national civil nuclear power program and is a trusted advisor to both public and private sector clients. He has taught international law for leading global institutions, including the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Dr. Robin Gaster is a research director of the Center for Clean Energy, Innovation and Information Technology, at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Sorry about that. His recent work covers data centers and energy, nuclear lessons from France, small modular reactors, the importance of gas for solar and wind, and the likely failure of hydrogen power projects. Dr. Gaster is also the president of Incumetrics, a research group focusing on innovation and metrics. He has advised high-level clients as well in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors, including national academies, U.S. Navy, and the governments of Finland and Sweden. Much of his work has focused on program design and evaluation for innovation initiatives. He has a recent book, The Behemoth, Amazon Rising, Power and Seduction in the Age of Amazon. And he is also a regular columnist at for CEO World. He has also been the CEO of 2 startups and holds a PhD from UC Berkeley. So join me in welcoming our 2 guests. In terms of logistics, we are going to open up with 2 shorter presentations, one by each of our speakers, and then we will have a more interactive conversation to follow after, hopefully, before we then pass it over and give you guys in the audience a chance to ask questions. So with that, William Fork, William, I'm going to ask you to kick things off. I know you have a beautiful deck with you, so thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's see if we can, there we go. Very nicely done. Worked immediately on the first click, which is great. Well, yeah, it doesn't happen. And I guess, it's true. I guess everybody should just turn the other way so they can see the deck. I can see it actually fine here. That's okay. We'll work on it. We thought, we have some amount of time to talk about the questions related to AI and energy. And I thought it might be useful, just as a little bit of a primer, to talk through some of the basics and the foundational pieces of what's going on in the world of AI as it interrelates with energy. And so the story is basically one that you have known, and this you've seen in the news, we've just talked about it, which is that the amount of energy required for artificial intelligence required purposes for the data centers is just massive. And when we say massive, we're talking about larger than entire countries are required, is the amount of energy that is required in order to meet the AI demand requirements. And so we think that it's around 2% of world power today. This is electricity power. We think that it will go up to 3 to 4%, let's say by 2030. Now, it turns out that it is not an even distribution. The distribution will occur in key locations, and I'll describe that here in a second. So this chart over to the right shows the number of data centers in the world. And you can see immediately that the United States has by far the largest number of those data centers. For round numbers, there are about 10,000 data centers in the world, of which about half are in the United States. If you looked at those numbers just, say, 3 or so years ago, you would have seen that the United States had about 2/3 of the data centers. So the United States essentially has the key number of data centers, and that is expected to grow. Now, where are some of the others? Well, some are in China, some are in Canada, some are in Europe in various places. But what's driving the largest number of changes, of course, relates to AI. Now, this is just the straight number of data centers. So this includes essentially your AWSs, your offshore data centers and so forth. It's not really, these data centers are not all the data centers that are creating the energy demand. We'll talk about that in a second. But this is just broad numbers, 10,000 data centers in the world, of which about half are in the US. And of course, this is another chart that sort of shows the same thing, but it shows you maybe in a little bit more granular detail how we compare against major other allies or key industrial countries in the world.
Former allies.
Right, precisely. And so you can see Germany, big country, small number, UK, China, Canada, France, and so forth. So really, we are the big behemoth in the data center world. Now, let's focus over to something that's a little bit different, which is where the energy demand is coming from. And these are the hyperscale data centers. These are the data centers that are driving the NVIDIA and other what are called GPUs and TPUs for providing the AI work that's being conducted worldwide. And of those, these what we'll call, for our purposes, we'll call them hyperscaler super hubs or just hyperscalers. You can see that the United States and China operate over 90% of the specialized AI data centers. So in the AI world,
It's the United States and China, almost the whole world. And you can see that even major locations that you would expect, where you would expect to find larger numbers, are very minimal. Europe, 6, very small percent. And then if you go to Asia and to Africa, it gets even smaller, outside of China, of course. Going back to the United States in terms of the U.S. outlook, what we have found is that that we expect, there's a variety of different reports that are out there, and I've been working in the AI energy world essentially, let's say, for at least 3 years for major clients. And when I first started getting into it, I had a client that came and said, we've got a demand curve of X number of dozens of gigawatts of power. And I thought, well, surely that can't be the case. Dozens of gigawatts of power? What are you talking about? And I had an associate go out and say, well, give me all the largest data centers in the United States, and let's look at the top 20. And he brought back a list, and it said 15 megawatts, 25 megawatts, 33 megawatts. And I said to the associate, well, how is this possible? How can we have a client that says they've got dozens of gigawatts of power requirement, and we're looking at the largest data centers in the United States, and they're in the 20, 30 megawatt range? Well, that was from 2021. I said, well, let's find the 2022 numbers. 2022, all of a sudden, it's 40 gigawatts, or 40 megawatts, 70 megawatts, 125 megawatts. And so in the course now of 2021 to 2026, we've gone from a large data center, which might have been, let's say, in the 30, 40 megawatt range. And a year ago or so, I would have said that the largest data centers in the United States were in the 1 gigawatt range. That's approximately 1 nuclear power plant. So if we'd say round numbers, a nuclear power plant is gigawatt, that's the size of a large data center. Today, when we think about the largest data centers, hyperscale data centers in the United States, we're looking in the 5 gigawatt range. So it just gives you an idea of the size, speed, and scale of the issue that we're looking at. And so anyway, according to some of the more recent reports, and these change essentially every 6 months or so, we could say that we need at least 55 gigawatts of power by 2030. And of course, that can change over time. So let's go back briefly to history. One of the fun parts of looking at this energy transformation is you look back in history and say, well, when has this type of major change occurred in the past? And, we can make some analogies between the Industrial Revolution in energy back at the turn of the century, the 19th to the 20th century, and we look at where we are today, which is another major step change in the requirements. And back in those time periods, people were basically creating electricity, they were using steam and so forth. And the question was, well, how do we value the cost of all of this power that we're creating? And essentially what you have is you add up all of the pieces of that. So you say, well, we have fire, water, creating steam. That has a cost associated with creating the machinery to do that. And you have electrons, and we came up with essentially dollars per kilowatt hour, or name your currency. In the same way, AI is very interesting because AI can create massive benefits for people. Imagine how much money and time you can save in productivity hours and efficiencies in many, many different areas. But how do you value it? Do you value it based on the benefit of your company to the decreased cost? No. Just like electricity as it was developing in the beginning of the industrial age, we look at AI in the context of its cost of the component parts. So we take the cost of basically producing those electrons, plus the cost of the GPUs, plus the cost of the models, plus basically what are called floating point numbers, which is the cost of basically the outputs, and that in turn has a cost. But the primary cost is actually the cost of electricity. So all of a sudden, when we think about AI, and we think about its value and what it costs in the worldwide economy, it turns out that the primary driver of AI is the cost of electricity. So data center use generally. Essentially, as I sort of described before, there are various kinds of data centers that are out there. The ones we're really talking about are these hyperscale data centers. And within those hyperscale data centers, there are various component parts. And so the cost of producing the power to drive those mostly today is computing. Also substantial is cooling. Also substantial is the facility and equipment. By the way, in presentations that I would make on this subject maybe a year or two ago, cooling was 25%. So, or larger than that, actually. One of my older slides, it was 40%. So the cost of cooling has gone down, the cost of computing has gone up. By the way, that has an impact on the location of data centers, because there was a time when people thought, well, the best place for data centers really is only in these cooler locations, cooler jurisdictions, and that is less the case today. In terms of how the energy is used, there are two major areas of cost within AI. The first is the cost of training the model, which requires using massive databases and essentially running through it and creating the base upon which the answers are developed. That has a cost. And so let's say a year or two ago, the cost of that was generally 20% training, 80% inference. Inference is the question and answer component. So when you're on ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, and you're asking questions, that cost of the question and answer piece is the inference side. So what we're seeing is that a lot of the cost is in inference. So you're not going to get that many. The improvements are not that great as you continue forward in AI. And then similarly, as more models are created and become established, and more people use AI, the inference cost and demand will increase. In terms of locations of where data centers will be likely to go, this is a very complex slide, but essentially the United States is the key place. And it's for a variety of reasons. We have capital, we have economies of scale, we have relatively cheap electricity, we have an interest in taking a leadership role in AI, and that is a little bit in contrast to Europe. The Middle East, by the way, is an area where there is development and there's potential interesting growth. And then within Asia, China is the lead. And then the rest of Asia is, somewhat resource constrained, but can take roles in different ways. And then the last part relating to the power for data centers. Partly, I'm a nuclear lawyer, so I know more about nuclear than I do somewhat other energy industries, but I work with basically a lot of them. And my point on this one slide is that when we're talking about energy, we're talking about large baseload energy, not hundreds of megawatts or tens of megawatts, but we're talking about 1, 2, 5+ gigawatt scale electricity consumption requirements. And for that, large baseload power that's very reliable is increasingly important. And so nuclear has a very special role to play in that context. And that's part of the reason why there's been so much growth and development in the context of nuclear for AI. So that's a quick summary.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to you, Robin, to continue with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like you to think, I'm going to be talking about the US. As William pointed out, it is the leading edge of the data center revolution, if you like. So I'm going to ask you to think about it from the perspective of the hyperscalers and the utilities, right? So those are the key actors in this particular drama. I'm going to start with the hyperscalers. They face a growth imperative. And we think of it as this sort of period of competition, struggle for advantage, moving down the cost curve, hopefully, but at least scaling quickly. That's what they see. Actually, they see it as a death match. It's a cage match out of which there may be only one survivor. They fear that AI will be like search, that Google will win or one of the other companies will win, and they will be driven out of the next stage in the technology revolution. So this is an existential threat for all of these companies. We think of them as sort of pushing the boundaries, but actually they're desperate. They think they must win this competition now. So what does that mean? That means that they must stay on the leading edge of compute and AI. They think that more compute, more scale means victory in the end, or is at least a necessary component, right? So that's why we see these, frankly, outlandish claims about how much compute is going to be installed in the United States in the next 3 or 4 years. These claims make no sense. We will come to that in a minute. But you've got to understand that they believe they have to do whatever they need to do to stay on that leading edge, that failure could be disastrous. So that's point one. Point two, we are entering a zone of almost total uncertainty. This is a problem for the utilities in particular. We'll come back to that. Why is it so uncertain? I think there are both demand and supply side components to this. At the sort of most individual level, we still don't really know what AI will be for and what the use cases will be. We don't know about how quickly it will really be taken up and used. We know that ChatGPT says it has 800 million monthly users. We have no clue how much they're actually using it. So we're in this period where we think this is a revolution. I certainly use AI daily. I think it is transformative. I think it's completely transformative, and I'm very worried about that. But I have kids. But we don't really have much of an idea of how it will be used and how much demand there will be at the end of the day. We don't know if some of the biggest players will be there. I think it's no better than 50-50 that OpenAI will survive this. I think it's probably giving them the best of it. There are small companies struggling with the giants. They don't have the capital resources, and they don't have the depth, and they don't have the revenue flows. They were an $8 billion company last year. And that is less than a rounding error for the big boys. So we don't know how much energy each query will really cost. There was a point in your slide about the important differences between text queries and video queries. As the world moves towards video, that increases demand. On the other hand, Google says that the cost the compute cost of addressing a text query fell 93% last year. So we have these sort of radical shifts in cost basis. We don't know how that's going to play out. Will there be enough users to overcome the declining need for electricity from each individual query? We don't know. And so that's the demand side. It's a fog. We don't really know. On the supply side, there are real challenges to building these enormous scale data centers that the hyperscalers are calling for. OpenAI wants to build 50 gigawatts of new data centers in the next 3 years. Frankly, this is nonsense. This is not going to happen. I'm quite happy to put my house on that. Why not? Well, there are three basic reasons. One is that finding the energy for that is going to be very difficult. That's why nuclear has become a hot topic now, and we can come back to that. But in general, we're asking for an enormous increase in energy capacity in a very short period of time. And people will say, well, what about gas? I mean, okay, we can just run up some more gas turbines. There is a 5-year waiting list right now for new gas turbines in the United States. And the companies that make them, like GE, got bit badly in the early 21st century and are being very cautious about expanding their capacity. It takes 10 years to build a large nuclear plant. Solar and wind are great, but they are variable. And that doesn't fit very well with 24/7 data centers. So on the energy side, there are real supply problems, challenges. How do you get new energy supply resources onto the grid? And how do you connect them? Transmission is yet another problem. Second problem is money. I don't like to be banging on about OpenAI only, but they're a great case. They are an $8 billion company. They are planning to spend $500 billion. That $500 billion ain't coming out of their cash flow. They have to borrow it, or they have to find equity investors, probably both. I think that is a challenge. Even the big boys are now going to the bond markets and going to private equity to look for money to build these things out. So cash will be a problem. And third, there are just the regular construction challenges. I don't know if any of you have actually built a house. It takes time. You have to get permits. You have to get yourself onto the construction company schedule. You have to get inspected. And for data centers, you have to get political permission to build them. It takes time. It isn't going to happen in a year. So there are all these uncertainties. Now let's turn to the context, the energy context in which these uncertainties operate. First off, you have to understand that the grid is sized for peak energy demand. There is actually plenty of energy available on the grid to serve data centers, but not at peak demand times. So if you can figure out a way to manage your demand properly, there is energy available. That's point one. But the grid itself is always sized to the maximum size of demand because we want the lights to stay on. Context two. Think about electric utilities. For decades, they have been sleepy companies run by conservative managers whose objective is to grow at 3 or 4 or 5% a year to provide a reasonable and very safe return to their investors. That's what they do. That's what utilities are. They are monopolies. They are local regulated monopolies in the United States. Think about the kind of people who go to run those. They don't come out of Silicon Valley. They do not. They come from the ranks of mid-level bureaucrats who are risk averse. And that is how utilities operate. So they live in this kind of quiet world, and suddenly they face an explosion of potential demand. There is all this uncertainty. They don't know if these big companies are going to be there next year. It must be really sort of shattering for their worldview to be trying to confront this. Very difficult. And the third contextual piece is politics and regulation. Because the grid is sized to peak demand, and because there is very little spare capacity at peak demand, right? You don't want to have capacity that you don't need. That costs money. So supply and demand are very tightly aligned. Regulators are there to make sure that the supply of electricity is maintained at all costs, and that the actual cost of electricity is more or less minimized. There are arguments about how well they do that, but that's their job. Allowing a huge new source of electricity demand onto the grid could have tremendous impact on what happens at peak demand moments. You can get massive price spikes. You can get electricity to supply to existing users turned off. Might happen. If you're talking about those massive new gigawatt plus demand in the context of an inflexible supply, because nobody is able to build that quickly, well, you know what supply and demand does, right? It means that prices will go up. And we can see already today, even though there are many arguments about how much data centers are actually driving prices, electricity prices are rising, and people ain't happy. So the political headwinds for data centers have been growing rapidly in the United States and I think elsewhere. So, this all sounds very gloomy and difficult, but there are solutions. There are solutions emerging because the hyperscalers in particular have realized that simply marching up to their local utility and putting in an order for a gigawatt of energy is not going to work. So what are they doing? First of all, they're all working on bring your own power, BYOP. And that includes nuclear, it includes geothermal, it includes gas. They are trying to find energy everywhere. So that's point one. Point two, they're putting it behind the meter. That is, they're co-locating it with their data centers. This does not entirely solve the interconnection problem. I can talk about that more. It's incredibly boring, but important. But it is helpful if they control their own sources of power. They're realizing that they must provide insurance to the grid. It's not enough to say, we'll take a gigawatt of power. What they have to say now, and it's clear that they are being forced to do this, is we will promise you that we will take 85% of that for the next 15 years, regardless of whether we're actually in business or not. We are going to insure you against stranded assets. So that's becoming an important feature here. Third, they're accepting higher rates, higher cost electricity to make sure, as Microsoft announced a couple of days ago, that they want to make sure that existing ratepayers don't have to pay for the new energy. And that's going to be necessary because none of the regulators will accept it.
How much higher?
Sorry?
How much higher?
That's a good question. I don't think we've really seen those deals yet. They're in negotiation in Ohio and in Virginia, but I don't think the deals have been announced yet. It is notable that Microsoft was prepared to pay $120 a megawatt for energy from 3 Mile Island. It's a long PPA. And so I think your point about energy being an important component of cost is correct. But in a certain sense, these companies are very cost insensitive to energy. They are sensitive to speed. They want the energy now, and if they have to pay a premium for it, well, fine. It's not a dominant part of their economic model. Let me talk about two other things, and then I'll stop. One is demand management. Your point about the balance between inference and training is really important because training can be done anytime. It's not time sensitive. So data centers have some capacity to shift demand across time away from peak periods. That is very important. It means that they can get access to cheaper energy and more abundant energy without straining the grid. They can also shift geographically. It's possible to move your load to a different location entirely, move to somewhere where it's nighttime. So if you have a global network of training, that certainly makes sense. We will see if they can manage to move inference effectively as well. There are some supply side things you can do too. There are new transmission technologies that can squeeze a lot more electrons out of the existing transmission network. And they're cheap and they're quick. So the US in particular has a problem because utilities are incentivized not to use them. But there are ways to solve that. So what I would say in the end is we have this tremendously uncertain picture, and people are trying to pick their way through it to satisfy the demands of the hyperscalers while protecting the existing base of users and the business models of the utilities. This requires both short-term solutions which include this kind of demand management structure and bring your own power. But they also will require long-term solutions, and that really is where I think nuclear has a place to play. I personally, and this is just my personal perspective, think that it is a lot more likely we will end up with a lot of small modular reactors than large reactors. But I'm happy to talk about that too. That's it. Perfect. I hope that wasn't more than 15 minutes.
No, that's perfect. Thank you both for excellent opening presentations. As the two of you were talking, I was sort of debating whether to start sort of with a longer term perspective on where supply might be going, or sort of the medium short term. But why don't we maybe kick off a little bit about nuclear and long term sort of expansion of supply. What are different countries doing to expand those? Because they're obviously heavy lifts, right, and very long-term projects. What role is regulation playing, and what's sort of the outlook in different parts of the world? We already talked about sort of the concentration of data centers to the U.S., but are we seeing sort of active strategies by other countries and regions to sort of address energy supply long term? I don't know if you want to start or you do, Robin. Feel free to. Yeah.
You have to think about, I'm sure you have a lot to say on this, so I'm going to be really quick. Sure. My point on this, I guess, is that domestic circumstances really matter. So the U.S. has a ton of cheap gas, and any nuclear development has to exist in that context. So it is competing with a cheap energy source. You look at Europe, not only doesn't it have gas, it is desperate for independence from Russian gas. Right, so there are national security strategy concerns. If you look at where nuclear is moving quickly, it is around the periphery of the Russian Empire. The smaller countries around there, smaller, they're all smaller, but Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, they're all pushing nuclear because they don't really have an alternative. It's not very sunny there. And they don't have gas. So for them, this is a strategic imperative.
Sure. But I would basically, maybe one way to start when we think about this globally is the re-recognition in the last, say 5-7 years, which is a lesson relearned, which is that energy security is national security. And so whether we look at that from the perspective of Europe, which, just as you mentioned, is looking for solutions away from Russian gas and the disruptions in energy. The European countries have essentially re-recognized that they have to have the ability to control their destiny on energy. And they can't be reliant on a third party, or particularly one major third party with gas pipelines from the Russians. And so all of Europe, and now I used to say, except for Germany, but this week Germany said they made a huge mistake, a huge strategic mistake. They finally admitted it, which of course everybody else knew, but they finally have come to that conclusion, that they have to look at nuclear power as a part of the supply for energy in the future. And in Europe today, essentially, almost all of the European countries are looking and actively working on new nuclear build projects. And that includes Sweden, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, the United Kingdom, France, et cetera. And now even Germany will start to get into the game a little bit. Within the United States, the energy security argument is a little bit different. If we think that artificial intelligence and the ability of the United States to shape artificial intelligence is a national security issue, all of a sudden we have a substantial issue, and that's where all of these numbers and assessments are coming from in terms of the context of how much energy is needed. Frankly, the United States just can't build 50 gigawatts of power off the top, and the numbers, so we just can't do it. And so the question is, well, what can we do and how can we do it? And by the time we figure all of that out, we'll, in 5 years or 10 years, we'll have a reassessment and we'll have a better understanding of where it's going. One way to analogize artificial intelligence is it's a little bit like the mid 80s and you had your, 286 computer and you thought you were on top of the world. I will never need a better computer in my life. This is the best thing ever. And then the 386 came out, and then the 486. The problem with data requirements is that the compute always needs to increase somehow. And whether it's a restriction on Moore's law or something else in the future, it's hard to tell. But in general, the compute power continues to grow, and historically, has done so and will continue to do so. And obviously, there will be cliffs, there will be restrictions, there will be changes in that environment to a certain extent. But if we look back at compute power over the last 60 plus years, the trajectory has always been larger. Even a year ago, when there was the implication that the Chinese were able to use faster, better, more efficient technologies, the reality is that the compute power continues to grow, and we should find efficiencies in different areas, and there are some really interesting, fascinating ways of doing that. But ultimately, we will have an energy demand increase, and the demand increase is so substantial that we don't know really how to fit it. And so if we plan for a pseudo worst case scenario, at least if we move if we start the trains running, by the time we actually know what the final numbers look like, or we have a better view on the fog as it lifts, it doesn't matter. We just can't build 50 plus gigawatts of power in a 5-year time period. And then with respect to Asia, again, we just talked a little bit ago about the fact that the Chinese are the other pseudo leader on the hyperscaler technologies, and the Asian countries will have to try to fit and make allotment for the demand requirements that their countries have. Key leaders, industrial countries that we rely on, like South Korea, like Japan, are also resource constrained. Of course, the Japanese, for the reasons we know, the Korean Peninsula also is space limited, resource limited in its own way. Frankly, one of the things that we think about in the United States closely is the relationship with South Korea and the importance of the South Korean supply chain to be able to assist in the delivery of a lot of these nuclear units. And whether it is the large reactor sets or the small reactor sets, the United States and our global allied relationships will need to have that type of industrial capacity to enable us to be able to be delivering nuclear power, whether it's in Europe or Asia or the United States.
Please. So I actually have a question for William. Currently, Korea is actually the low-cost supplier for large nuclear reactors outside China. It's claimed that the reactor in the United Arab Emirates came in at $4,000 per kilowatt. We don't really know because it's not very transparent there. But Korea is now involved in a number of projects across Europe and Korean companies, and we will find out how transferable low-cost production in Korea is to high-cost Europe. This is a really important moment for the future of nuclear power, because if it continues to cost $10,000 a kilowatt to build a nuclear power station at a time when you can build a gas-powered power station for around $1,000 or $1,200 a kilowatt, that is not sustainable and competitive over a period of time. We have to see prices come down significantly for nuclear. And so the question of whether building its order book, rolling out large power stations, large plants across Europe is going to be enough is question one. And question two, we appear to be now entering a kind of great power competition world. It's not the same world it was when even 5 years ago. So what should the perspective of the United States government be to the success of Korean companies across the world? if Korea is successful, and if the Korean companies are successful, as I hope, in building low-cost power stations, what does that say when we don't really have a national champion? We have Westinghouse, which is, after all, a Canadian company. How do people imagine that will sit in Washington? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't actually have an answer to that. Maybe William does.
Well, a couple things. One is, it is absolutely vital for the nuclear industry to be able to deliver for allied Western nations the nuclear power at a cost and a timeline that is competitive. What is competitive? One of the important parts to remember about nuclear power is that it's a long-term strategic investment by by countries, by states. So the cost of nuclear power, remember, is not just in the overnight cost, the cost of construction, which is the primary substantial cost. It's the amortized cost of nuclear power over an 80-year time period. It's also the long-term relationship between the supplier that's delivering the technology and the nation that's the receiving end of it, because those relationships create supply relationships that last for typically the entirety of the lifespan of that nuclear reactor. There are also broader considerations in the context of nuclear nonproliferation. The world that we live in today in the area of nuclear nonproliferation in large part was structured because of the delivery of Westinghouse and General Electric technology to Europe, Asia, and a variety of other countries, minus the Russians and a few others. And those nonproliferation standards and systems created the baseline standard that now enables us to live in the world that we have today. If China or Russia, or really China, or other countries are exporting technologies without those same nonproliferation standards, it creates a degree of uncertainty that has a cost associated with it. In terms of delivery of power, the cost of nuclear power does not necessarily have to be enormous. There have been wide variance in that. Some of the arguments are that the cost of construction, the high cost of construction in certain plants, was because of the redevelopment of a supply chain. When you look at the cost of nuclear power plants in China, the AP1000 designs, the same designs that were built in the United States for $30 billion for 2 units, approximately, the costs in China are dramatically lower. Part of that is supply chain, part of that is regulatory costs, part of it is just doing it more often so that you know what the costs are and you drive things down.
And subsidies.
Well, the total cost in China are not necessarily with subsidies. With respect to the Emirates, as an example, I was the first general counsel of the United Arab Emirates Company, the Emirates Nuclear Energy Company, and I negotiated the EPC contract with KEPCO for the construction of the 4 nuclear units in Abu Dhabi. And what we know from that experience is that the Koreans were able to deliver on time, on budget nuclear reactors, and a very substantial win for the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
So when we think about sometimes failures on the nuclear side or high costs on the nuclear side, we also should think about some of the successes. Now, the Emirates was now 15 years ago, 2009, maybe more than 15 years ago. So the question is, can nuclear power be delivered with that same technology or a similar technology at a low cost? Well, my most recent example of that is the bid provided by the Koreans in the Czech Republic for new nuclear reactors for 1,000 megawatt designs, not the 1,400 megawatt designs. So it's a little bit different. But the public cost associated with that was basically, I think, $8+ billion per unit at a fixed price contract. So if you can imagine that the Koreans, the cost, by the way, in 2009 for the UAE bid, as announced, was 4 nuclear units, 1,400 megawatts at 5.6 gigawatts for $18.1 billion. So a little over $4 billion per unit. In the Czech Republic last year, it's $8 billion plus per unit. Relatively comparable and not consistent with $20, $30, $40 billion per unit. It's a cost that's acceptable. And then the most important part to remember is that this is a national investment. Remember that the cost of our nuclear power plants that we built as a fleet in the United States was extraordinarily cheap, okay, in the less than billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars for nuclear power plants. Those plants operate today in the United States. They provide 18% of all of our energy in the United States. That is the definition of an investment. Our former leaders made decisions that were an investment in a risk, a partial risk. They didn't know it was going to work out perfectly. They didn't know everything about nuclear. We know more about nuclear today than we did back in the 1970s. But that investment, that risk that they took, those utilities took, now allow us the benefit of 18% nuclear generation capacity. So when we think about talking to other foreign countries, by the way, there are lots of neat examples. The Philippines is an example. There's a lot of neat country examples on this. But when we think about nuclear, we have to think about sort of the total costs. Some of these are national security, national relationship, total overnight cost amortized over an 80-year time period, and then the issue with respect to fuel, and then you have spent fuel issues, and all of that kind of stuff. So you have to kind of put all those pieces together, and that's why we say that nuclear is the province of governments. Nuclear is a unique energy capacity. It has benefits that are different from other energy sources, and they're the kind of risks that states have to be involved in. And there's state financing, state support, bilateral relationships, and so forth. So I feel like I've given you a little bit like a sales pitch on nuclear, okay, which is not really my intent per se, but it is important to sort of understand some of that if you haven't heard of that before, because that is the conversation that is occurring now in many state capitals worldwide, where there has been a reassessment, relearning of knowledge that had previously been sort of forgotten about what the benefits of nuclear are and how and why you can develop nuclear power projects.
Just one tiny addendum. I agree with a great deal of that. There was a lot of enthusiasm for solar and wind a decade ago, and we've seen a lot of growth, and that's a good thing. I'm happy with that. But what we've discovered is that because of the variability of solar and wind, you require substantial energy insurance. Now, energy insurance doesn't come from nuclear because it's a baseload. It's basically a baseload system. It really has to come from fossil fuels. It has to come from gas, because you don't have batteries that will last weeks if there's a wind drought, as there was in Germany. So there are limits to what you can do with solar and wind if you want to get off gas. And in Europe, they want to get off gas for strategic reasons. So solar and wind are not necessarily a pathway that will get you there. They're a partial pathway, but they've been very successful. They're very expensive, but that's a different story. I just wanted to say that that alternative pathway is looking a lot more difficult now.
Certainly, the winds have turned in the area of nuclear, and nuclear didn't have access to the capital, the worldwide capital that is now available under the green programs in the European Union. The World Bank is now reshifting and allowing, at least for initial assessments for nuclear, for World Bank financing for assessments of nuclear projects. Nuclear is not perfect. Nuclear is not a panacea to everything. But when we start looking at major industrialized countries where they have major power needs, which connects directly into this question of AI. Yeah. Who needs the AI? The AI is not distributed, equally among countries worldwide. It is focused in key jurisdictions, and in those key industrialized countries that are focusing on the development of AI hyperscale capacities where the energy is needed, nuclear becomes, increasingly, as you look through the various options, a very good option. But it's a long-term option, and what you're seeing in the most recent announcements with Meta, for example, with Constellation or with Vistra, 3+ gigawatts of power. major companies that need the electricity for the compute power are essentially entering into large-scale PPAs to allow that to be delivered. And the reason they're doing that is because they can't build the nuclear power plants, as you said, in a couple of years. The nuclear is a long-term investment that takes time.
Before switching over, I'm curious to hear about sort of short-term and medium-term solutions as well, and challenges. But before switching over to that, we know from the trade deal coming out between the U.S. and Korea in the fall that energy is a strategic sector for investments in the U.S. I'm curious to hear, and we have already talked about sort of Korea's role in nuclear, specifically to the U.S. and that cooperation between South Korea and the U.S. and the incoming investments in energy. What are some of the opportunities and challenges, and maybe specifically regulatory challenges related to that nuclear cooperation between the two countries? Yeah.
You go ahead on the international cooperation part. That's
Well, the United States and Korea have had a long, close relationship in collaboration on nuclear for many years. It has gone through, a bump in the context of some litigation that occurred more than a year ago or so, which has reached a settlement between KEPCO, KH&P, and Westinghouse. And so the impacts of that and the total long-term relationship is what I would describe as to be determined. Exactly how will Westinghouse and the Korean companies work together on large projects in the future is being discussed, as I understand it. In addition to that, there are other areas of collaboration. So companies like NuScale, a U.S. publicly held company, has a supply chain that is Korea-based through Doosan. The Koreans are looking at a variety of opportunities with small modular reactors companies in the United States, as, by the way, are the Japanese and others. And so, it basically there is an opportunity for those companies that have capabilities and those companies that need those capabilities to match up. And what we see is a matching occurring and discussions occurring about how to quickly and effectively deliver nuclear power projects for those countries or locations where the demand is needed. And some of this occurs naturally. In other words, if you have a project and all of a sudden they've said go, you need to have that supply chain put together. Turns out on the nuclear side, you actually need to work ahead of time because the regulatory pieces will start to fit together in a way that it requires time and effort to assemble the team in a way that allows for delivery on time and on budget.
I'd like to add one thing to that, and generally to this discussion, and that is the notion of an order book. So the idea is that in order to drive down costs, you have to have a predictable book of orders stretching into the future so that you can replicate what you do. And this is something that can be achieved in some countries more easily than others. So, for example, France has just put together a plan to build 6 new nuclear power stations over the next 15 years or so. They're going to be funded largely by the state, or at least more than half by the state, using future tax revenues from the electricity, which I think is a very innovative solution. But they're able to do this because Électricité de France not only will deliver the power, the construction and power stations, but they are also the buyer. They buy and distribute a very large share of electricity in France. And you compare that to the United States, where there are 3,000 plus utilities, ranging in size from whales to minnows. Where is the order book? No single utility is going to buy more than one of these things. Maybe 2. Maybe the biggest utilities might buy 2. So how do you get an order book in the United States that stretches to 10, 15, 20 nuclear reactors? It's much more difficult in our environment than it is where electricity and the state are much more intertwined.
And part of the answer to that could be, we don't know yet, so it's to be determined. But we are seeing the outlines of that, of course, in the last 6 months or so under the current administration. We're seeing the announcements between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan and the United States government for a $550 billion essentially, allocation based on trade money, and the identification of money that would then be allocated to U.S. corporations. So, for example, $80 billion to Westinghouse, $25 billion to NuScale and Entra One, $20+ billion, let's say, to other companies like your Bechtels and your Kiewits. Additionally, the Japanese supply chain, your Tochus and maybe other banks like Mitsubishi, Marubeni, and so forth, Mitsui and Marubeni. So all of a sudden, in one deal, if they can figure out what to do with it, there is money available for projects, and that does not require going to Wall Street per se and trying to figure out a project finance system that requires bonds and a bunch of other stuff. So that's a very interesting model. Additionally, there are news reports relating to the relationship between Westinghouse and the United States government in ways that may resolve some of those issues. And the primary driver of it, is the AI demand curve, with the idea that they would have maybe 8 Westinghouse reactors constructed, and then they'd have to figure out some of the details. But those numbers give you an outline of potentially how that could be done.
This is fascinating, and time is starting to run away from us, I think, a little bit. But I still want to just leave a little bit of time to talk about sort of interim solutions and short-term and medium-term solutions. Robin, you've mentioned sort of market concentration a bit, and sort of market reform, perhaps as well in some of your writings.
Yeah.
I'm curious what kind of role that might play, and touching on sort of the interaction of demand management and how that plays with supply and letting sort of markets work.
Yeah, the demand management piece is really important, and I think the AI companies understand that now. They've now come to understand that peak demand is different, and that they have to work within the constraints of the existing electricity grid. That we're not going to get a huge expansion very, very quickly enough for them. So they have to figure out what it looks like to be avoiding stressing the grid at peak demand times. And they're doing that, and they're figuring it out. And there are deals being made. For example, Dominion has just done a deal to provide 20 megawatts of energy, but 10 of it is conditional. 10 of it can be pulled back when the grid is stressed. So the data centers are accepting that they have an important role to play in maintaining the reliability of the grid and in not adding to peak demand. So that's one thing. And it also means that there is existing capacity. It's not, if you look at this and think of it not in terms of gigawatts, but in terms of gigawatt hours or terawatt hours over the course of the year, right? It's not that we have to build 50 gigawatts of new generation immediately. We have to find hundreds of gigawatt hours of energy for the data centers. And we can do that within the existing grid by doing more at off-peak times. Yes, it is more challenging for the AI companies, but fortunately AI is good at managing that kind of thing. So there are ways to manage the demand side more effectively. And the AI companies are realistic. They realize that you can't magic the supply of energy so that it arrives when you need it. You have to work with what you got. And on the supply side, utilities are currently incentivized to build new assets. The way it works is they get a return on their invested assets. So they like to put steel in the ground. They like new transmission towers. They like new generating plants. They like anything that will increase their asset base so they make more money. The federal agency in charge of regulating transmission must accelerate changes that it has already started very, very in baby steps. They need to provide incentives for utilities to do smart things with the existing grid to add capacity without putting new steel in the ground. This can be done relatively cheaply, very cheaply, and very quickly. And I think it's quite likely that there will be there will be legislative fixes in Congress to exclude this kind of improvement from NEPA and other regulatory stuff. So, for example, if you put new sensors on a transmission tower, you can increase the voltage going through there on an annual basis very substantially, 20, 30%. If you reconductor them by putting better conductors on those towers, you can add further benefits. Currently, if you want to do that, you have to go through NEPA. You have to go through through environmental review. But there's no reason for that, really. You haven't changed the transmission. So I think Congress will fix that this year. And then FERC will probably make more baby steps. I hope that they get a substantial kick in the butt and move along a lot faster. So what I'm saying is, in the short term, there are fixes. The energy is there in the system. Both the demand and supply side need to be unlocked somewhat to do that. But that over the longer term, yeah, we're going to need more generation.
Perfect. With that, let's open up for a conversation here with the room. I see a hand here already. Sebastian, if you want to, I saw a hand just here by the screen. Sorry, if you don't mind, so he can find you. And please introduce yourselves before you phrase the question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Raj Lakiani. I am an entrepreneur in the grid space. I'm also an energy investor and come from the venture capital industry. A couple comments, questions. So forgive me if it's multi-pronged questions, but you were talking a little bit about OpenAI. Just it wasn't half a trillion; it was 1.5 trillion. On a $500 valuation. There was a recent survey that said that everybody wants AI, but nobody wants to spend any money on it. So just something to ponder. Definitely share your pessimism. And I wonder, in the markets, as a lot of these companies are tapping the bond market to use debt to pay for some of this infrastructure. Do you think that this could cause a financial crisis? And even if it does, do you think that because of the national security implications that our government thinks, AI is absolutely necessary for, our competition with China? So that's something I think a lot about. It's why I haven't completely shorted the market. Is there national security implications that would make this industry kind of too important to fail? So I'd love for you to comment on that. The other thing I was thinking about also, as you were saying, we've got the energy in the system, but it's about managing peak. I wonder if utilities, if they think about another approach, which is putting massive batteries on commercial industrial customers to kind of manage peak a little bit better versus building all this nuclear. Because I think the thing that scares me is our capitalistic system is short and best case medium term. Can it weather the changes in the politics where the next administration could not be a big fan of say data centers if there's strong consumer backlash against it, which is starting to creep up, and if projects ultimately get canceled. So anyway, leave me with a couple things that I'd love further commentary on.
Sure. Well, on the risk related to the financing of AI, you have to differentiate between OpenAI, which has no financial basis for its enormous proposed spending. It's just simply a bet that they will get there first and that they will dominate. And I think it's a bad bet. Google is sitting on an absolute gusher of cash from its many successful businesses. And I think they can comfortably afford the money that they're spending. So can Meta and so can Microsoft, because they all have big legacy businesses. I would be more concerned about Oracle because it's so closely tied to OpenAI. I have no idea what XAI really looks like. So I don't think that it's that from a sort of sector perspective, we're looking at the collapse of all the companies. I agree there's no business model yet, but some of the companies are very well positioned to survive any fallout. Your point about the variability of policy for nuclear is very, very well taken. I'm actually starting a new project focused on understanding how to build a persistent, sustainable, comprehensive, and flexible nuclear policy in the US. How do you build the capacity to have that kind of policy in a world which is very fragmented, where DOE is essentially a research agency, and where we have very little conversation across the aisle? So I'm happy to talk to people offline about that if they're interested. I do think it's a problem. I mean, it's great that the current administration is leaping, headfirst into the pool. But we've seen this before, and it has not been sustainable. And your point,
EV market, people were so excited about it. Now you have the automotive companies taking big write-downs.
Well,
so
in last administration we had hydrogen.
Yeah.
Hydrogen was going to solve everything, and it turns out that hydrogen is a total bust. So,
I think we have about 5 minutes. One more question. I was thinking if we could maybe gather two quick ones. So I see one here and I see one in the rear. Why don't we gather those two quickly? Thank you.
Quick question for Will. In your presentation, you mentioned that energy consumption for cooling system went down. At the same time, the powering had went up. Would you explain a little bit on what happened?
Sure. In essence, what happened is that the compute power just increased so much that the cooling power is not as much of a requirement. So these rack systems, which used to be in the parts of a kilowatt, are now increasing in demand requirements. And so if you're going from the older to the newest to the future racks, they just need a lot more power, and the cooling is just is reduced as a result. So it's just essentially more efficiency on the racks, on the NVIDIA Blackwell or other chips, and a reduction in the cost for cooling.
Yeah, hi. Good discussion, Will and Robin. Andy Patterson with U.S. Nuclear Industry Council. Huge fan of GABI, Florence. So maybe the question to take you to the end of your points is combining Will's comment about $550 billion from Japan. In other words, there's lots of capital available. Loan guarantee program at DOE has $250 billion of authorized capacity. Your point, Robin, was where is the order book? So some of us are working on a financial analysis. It's coming to you, Mark Holt, on how to positively score investments in the nuclear fleet. Mm-hmm. These aren't costs. These are assets. Every other government in the world sees nuclear plants as a positive as Will said, 60-year asset. Why are we scoring them like food stamps? They're not.
Any comments?
Well, I always agree with whatever Andy says, so that's that's my first and major comment. But in essence, that's exactly right. And I think that part of the thing that we're looking at is, I agree that there is absolute political risk, and the history of nuclear is really a history of political risk, failures and successes in different areas. And it is absolutely the case that one administration can change, and that investments in time and effort that have been placed into nuclear power plants can be reduced. My favorite example of that is Taiwan, and you can see basically the Taiwanese government, every time it changes, they open and close and shut down their nuclear power plants. Maybe one difference here, which is to be determined, is that we're seeing a larger strategic change, and it's not just in the United States. It's not just in one state in the United States. It's essentially all of Europe. It's much of Asia. It is India, by the way. We didn't talk about India hardly at all today. India has a massive program for new nuclear power development. And so what we're seeing is really significant nuclear power projects under development, under consideration, almost everywhere. And even if a few of these start getting off the ground, frankly, the supply chain will be tested, and then we'll have another discussion about can we actually deliver what we're even talking about, even at a base level.
Any final? Thank you so much. Join me in thanking William and Robin for some amazing insights here on the panel today, and we'll continue the program shortly.
All right. It's now 11:24 or so why don't we begin our second panel? So first of all, welcome back in from your short break. We hope you enjoyed the first panel, talking about all things nuclear and the United States and Korea. My name is Tom Ramage, and I'm an economic policy analyst here at Korea Economic Institute. And today we are joined by Ms. Jackie Carney and Dr. Young-Soo Hwang. And we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence, energy security, and supply chain resilience, particularly in the context of the United States and Korea. And we're both complement and support one another in these needs. So first, I think as the first panel today pointed out, energy security is becoming a huge part of not only the demand for artificial intelligence, but also for geopolitical competition. And to some extent, U.S. energy dominance has now been framed in the context of U.S.-China competition. As the first panel pointed out, U.S. and Chinese competition for data center development is now focusing wholly on electricity generation. And there's a lot of excitement about this in regards to artificial intelligence. So today, hopefully, we're going to cover from a bird's eye view what nuclear generation and development looks like in the United States, and particularly how this is going to support U.S. data centers, but also how Korean technology is factoring into global AI development and maybe where they are going to be working together. And in terms of that working together, we can talk about joint investment in enriched uranium supply, technology development for small modular reactors, and the goal from the current U.S. president to quadruple U.S. civil nuclear power generation by 2050. So a lot to come on that front. I will briefly introduce our speakers' bios, and then we're going to let Ms. Carney go first. So first, Jackie Carney is Director of Federal Government Affairs and Public Policy for Constellation Energy Corporation. Jackie has been with Constellation and its predecessor, Exelon, since 2010. She is responsible for developing and executing strategies to achieve Constellation's public policy objectives. Prior to joining Constellation Exelon, Jackie was with a small lobbying firm focusing on energy issues, representing a variety of clients, including corporations, trade associations, and coalitions. Jackie also founded and served as executive director of the Foundation for Nuclear Studies, a 501c3 educational nonprofit. Jackie received her Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law. She received her Bachelor of Arts with distinction from the University of Virginia, where she majored in both government and economics. Jackie and her husband, Steve DeAquila, live in McLean, Virginia, with her two sons, Stephen and Ryan. And Dr. Yang-Soo Huang, who recently arrived here, is currently serving as a professor for special affairs at KEPCO International Nuclear Graduate School, or KINGS, in South Korea. He is currently studying the global nuclear nonproliferation, security, nuclear export, SMR implementation, and the nuclear fuel cycle. Before joining KINGS, he served as a president of Korea Institute of Nuclear Nonproliferation and Control, or KINAC, and a senior vice president of Korea Atomic Energy Research Institute, or KERI. He worked as a member of the technical advisory group for NSSC, Korean Nuclear Safety and Security Commission. He was located at USCSIS as a visiting fellow during the 123 negotiation between the ROK and the US. He has now served as a center director of INC, or the International Nuclear Nonproliferation and Cooperation Center at KINGS, since 2024. He received his BS from the Department of Nuclear Engineering at Seoul National University and his MS and PhD from the Department of Nuclear Engineering at University of California, Berkeley. And in 2006, he was selected as the Best Nuclear Scholar of the Year by Korean Nuclear Society. He has worked on the nuclear fuel cycle and non-proliferation and security for 40 years. So those are our panelists. We have a lot to discuss. But Ms. Carney, maybe you could go first and kind of tell us not only what Constellation Energy does and how they fit into the U.S. nuclear landscape, but also what the bird's eye view of this is in the U.S. How is nuclear power development going?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here. To be honest, I felt, I was relatively accomplished, and then I read my co-panelist's bio and saw his PowerPoint. I'm like, man, I am outmanned up here. But it's an honor to be here on the same panel as you, and I appreciate y'all inviting me here to speak. As Tom has graciously read, the highlight of my bio that he read out is my two sons. But nonetheless, I have been in this industry with Constellation for about 16 years now. Prior to that, about a dozen years working on related energy issues. So I've been doing this. Nuclear's, I don't want to say it's in my blood, but it's definitely been something that's important to me, both personally and professionally, for a real long time now. And as he mentioned, part of what I had done was to start up the Foundation for Nuclear Studies many years ago, which is a small C3 on the Hill. So what we did back then for the foundation was hold these little small briefings, brought in food, brought in Hill staff, and had these same conversations that's here. So I really think I see the value in these small events. We bring people in to talk, to discuss, and I think this is exactly the thing that we need to be doing, and I appreciate being involved here. As far as Constellation is the country's largest nuclear power generator, largest owner and operator of nuclear plants. We have 23 plus a few that we co-own and don't operate. So we have been in the nuclear business for a very long time, and definitely we are the country's largest generator of clean energy. I don't know, you may have seen recently, we just closed an acquisition of Calpine Corporation, which is the largest owner-operator of natural gas-fired electric facilities and geothermal. So we are now the largest nuclear, natural gas, and geothermal. Don't ask me about natural gas or geothermal just yet, because we were under very strict orders not to talk until it actually closed. There's all sorts of regulations. I don't really, despite having a JD, I don't want to get tripped up about all that. So it's been a great run with Constellation. Now, what we do, we've done a lot of work. I know this is specifically this forum about artificial intelligence. And we have been engaged with artificial intelligence for a number of years now. And honestly, it couldn't have come at a better time. I guess for society, for the world, but for Constellation, that this has, we were shutting down plants before the end of their licensed tenure. premature, for economic reasons. Everything turned on its head when AI, I guess, broke out. So we've been talking to, I'd say, all of the hyperscalers and many other data center developers for a number of years now. And our team is particularly well suited for being creative as far as what you're going to need, and we'll structure something to meet the needs of the individual. We'd call them our end user, our customer of electricity. And clearly electricity is a key component to being able to win the race for AI. I mean, that's basically what we're in, is a race for AI. And we're proud to be a part of that. We're not the biggest part. We remind ourselves of that all the time. We are not the only part. Now, the challenge that we're really working on, and for electricity in general, is that electricity the demand needs to meet the supply exactly at that moment. You need to, if you're off at all, things go south very quickly. So trying to predict what the load's going to be, and this is something that, even despite my decades of working here, load is basically demand. So when people say load, it confuses me, but it just means what your demand is going to be. We need to meet the load, meet the demand simultaneously with what we have, the entire grid. So that's a lot of forecasting, trying to figure out what we're going to need and where, and how much is actually, part of the problem. Let me just step back to where I was talking about, talking with all these hyperscalers, trying to come, to service them, to provide them with electricity. We have had some public deals announced where, for instance, we're in a 20-year power purchase agreement with them that is allowing us to restart what used to be called 3 Mile Island, is now the Crane Clean Energy Center after our former CEO, Chris Crane. So we are restarting that, which was a very well-functioning plant, but just for economics had closed down 5 years, almost to the day from our announcement, or till our announcement that we're going to restart it. We're also in a deal for a power purchase agreement with Meta for one of our new Illinois sites. It's a single unit in Illinois, in Clinton, that is going to be supplying Meta with the attributes for the electricity. So we've reached some deals. I can't even tell you the amount of calls that I am either on or avoiding or not invited to that go into making these deals. But it's really been existential for us, I think also for the nuclear industry in general, that this AI demand has come on. Now, the challenge is going to be meeting it and meeting it affordably. So that's something that we'll probably get into a little bit later here. But we don't want to build something new. Obviously, building anything new is not an easy thing to do. We don't want to build something new if it's not going to be used. And some of the load has been, let's say, inflated because, say Amazon is going to say, we're going to build a data center here, there, and there. And then maybe if one of them comes on, that's fine, but they want to get their stake in the ground. So I think stakeholders are starting to realize this. Policymakers are starting to realize this. So that's going to be addressed. I think is the first step that would be necessary. And I'd also just want to point out that Constellation is in a competitive market. So we are not in the vertically integrated system like much of the country. I'm trying to explain how the old-fashioned way in the U.S. would be you have one company that owned the generation, and then the wires, the big wires to transmit it, and then the small wires to get it to the houses. The generation, transmission, distribution was all owned by one company, and they would get a rate of return on their investment, and they'd be guaranteed that, and the customers would pay that. It's like, I'm looking around, a lot of people here didn't ever really know what I'm talking about, like Ma Bell. But when it was vertically integrated, we're all in competitive markets. So any risk we take is purely on our shareholders. So we are not guaranteed that customers are going to pay us back for any investments that we make. So we're very cautious. We do a lot of analysis before deciding where we're going to invest and what we're going to invest in. But we think it's a wonderful economic opportunity. It's also a national security imperative. It's a domestic, growth economic issue for the country. So it is imperative that these AI centers get built and that they're able to be powered up. So we spent a lot of time working with them. And I would just before moving on, I just want to point out that our fleet, what we currently operate, I mentioned the 23 plants, is, I don't want to call them old. I mean, they're existing, which is an important distinction. But we are, like the Gen 3, the the pressurized water reactors, the boiling water reactors. That's where our expertise and what we've been, where we come in is, and the existing reactor fleet. We are looking at very closely a lot of the new and advanced, the micro, the SMRs, small modular reactors. That is not, as the premier nuclear company, we do have to look at everything. We want to keep our eyes on everything, see what's going to move. I don't anticipate that we will be the first mover on building any of these advanced technologies, but it is definitely something we are keeping our eyes on. A lot has changed over the years. I remember, and maybe 5 years ago, at the time it was Exelon, the CEO, saying he'd never build a new nuclear reactor. It's crazy, no way, no how. It's amazing how quickly things can change. And as I said, some of the plants that have been closed down, like our TMI or Crane, are restarting. It's the new demand is giving a life extension to some of our economically struggling plants in the past. So it's been great. And I think, let me just, basically Constellation's not shutting out any of the options. We're going to look at everything we can to try and provide customers with what they want and what they need. This is, again, like I said, a very interesting conversation. I will let Dr. Wang discuss all the things you really need to know. But from a policy perspective, if you have any questions, and I would just end it on, there's definitely been a shift in public perception, which is so important. Like I said, it's been something I've worked in and been a supporter of for decades. It is amazing to see the difference between how public reacts, how policymakers react, that nuclear is no longer a dirty word. It's a necessary thing. So it's really been kind of a fun run, and it's nice to see people recognizing that. And I look forward to maybe helping out and explaining or answering any questions if you have. Thanks, Tom.
Excellent. So largest nuclear company in the United States, and a lot of deals to follow there. Thank you. Look forward to hearing about it. We now have Dr. Huang for his presentation.
Hello, my name is Dr. Yong-Sung from South Korea. I never work for the nuclear industry. I only work for the technology development. And sometimes I work for the 123 agreement negotiation with the United States, and I sometimes work for the issues of Iran nuclear problems. But today, I changed my direction a little bit about how we actually can implement the real nuclear power to produce electrons for the AI industry. We have talked about the same vision, very good vision of the nuclear energy many, many times already. As you might remember, we talk about the real implementation of so-called integral fast reactor, which is now the basis of your ARC technology, sodium fast reactor, at the end of the 80s. And also, around 20 years ago, we talked a lot about nuclear renaissance, named as GNEP. At that time, we have a special brand name, Loan Guarantee Office, and they actually borrowed a lot of money to construct Vogels Unit 1 and 3 and 4. We are doing the same business again and again. So now the US government would like to spend $80 billion for the new build of the largest scale reactors at this moment. Before I begin to my speech, I'd like to ask to you, how many of you are coming from the real customer, hyperscalers? Nobody. Yes. So if we are talking about the real business world, there should be always a customer. And we should listen to the real demand from the customers. Are you ready? Maybe not. So that's the big problem that I always think about the nuclear energy. We have a big plan, big plan, big plan. But can we accomplish the real mission? So we should work hard. So somebody already mentioned that nuclear industry is like a turtle with a low speed. But the Silicon Valley is like the speed of the light. How can you match the very slow turtle with the speedy Silicon Valley demand? It's the task that we should work on very, very hard. So that's it for my whole presentation, but I will continue my presentation. Okay, really. So actually, South Korea started the nuclear energy right after the Korean War. At that time, South Korea was the poorest country in the world. We got a lot of help from African countries for our economy at that time. So these are all the textbook of the nuclear energy provided by US aid. Do you still have US aid in this country? So things are changing rapidly. So I still ask my old Carrie to keep these books. These books are very expensive, actually. If you try to buy these books, second-hand books, you have to pay a lot of money. But at that time, US government and all the US universities generously donated all these books for free of charge. So we learned nuclear energy from scratch with the full support of the United States. Oops. So I also would like to go back to the future, not future, but for the past. And fortunately, we had a good success in UA. And last year, we had also good success in Czech Republic. And we are now proud of the slogan of on time and within budget. Can you repeat that in the United States with the collaboration with the US companies? Maybe, maybe not. China can do it. So if you can hire Chinese CNNC, I'm sure they can deliver their version of AP1000. They have another brand name, CAP1000, within 54 months. We cannot do that. South Korean cannot do that. Chinese did a lot of effort to make that kind of success. When they first revealed the AP1000 in their territory, they spent more than 10 years because the designing of AP1000 is not so easy to construct and to manufacture the critical component. It's very, very complicated. So they had a lot of trial and errors. We learned a lot of technology from combustion engineering at the end of last century. We have to modify it to make the best pragmatic version, APR 1400. Now, theoretically, South Korea can construct the APR 1400 within 48 months, 4 years. It requires a lot of trial and errors. So if there is a customer which would like to build AP1000 with a consortium with the United States and South Korea, we cannot do it because it will take another trial and errors. Eventually,
building an SMR next door.
Well, maybe not. Building SMR is not so easy job. So some people already mentioned that Doosan LMLT is working with NuScale to introduce the NuScale SMRs. For Doosan Energy, even though they claim they are the world best, it's not so easy to manufacture the critical component of the NuScale SMRs because it's so fancy. That means it's very compact design. So it's not so good to manufacture something in short time. Theoretically good, but practically it's not so easy. So there are always trial and errors. So, but still, as already mentioned by many of our colleagues, you should work on how to integrate nuclear energy with the AI industry. And our biggest customer would be hyperscalers. And nowadays, as you already mentioned, we are talking about hyperscaler AI data center, which requires 3 to 5 gigawatt electricity. How can we do that? I think we can do it. Why I'm going backward all this? I always say, where there is a will, there is a way. That's the first English that I learned when I entered the middle school. At that time, I didn't know how to spell any kind of statement, but my English teacher asked me to memorize this one by next day. I knew that I would be severely penalized if I could not memorize it. So thanks to him, I can still memorize, where there is a will, there is a way. Oh, still I'm going backward. Yeah, as I already mentioned, and that as you know, that we need a lot of electrons. And as you know, for the time being, CCGT, the combined cycle gas turbine, is the best option, without any doubt. But Siemens, Mitsubishi, and other companies cannot deliver it until 2030. Nowadays, Tucson Reliability also would like to penetrate in the market, but it will take a lot of time. And eventually, we definitely need nuclear energy to work with the AI industry. Then we know the demand from the hyperscalers. They might be a little bit insensitive to the cost of the power generation, but still they would like to have the new power generation as scheduled. That's the very difficult challenge. We need a lot of teamwork because we are very good to construct something in the UAE on time. But we do not know labor unions and how all the regulation system in the United States. So we definitely need a combination of the team effort between United States and South Korea. So we usually called Team Chorus. And some people criticize the brand name of the Team Chorus because for the Mr. Trump, there should be US first. So what's the proper name?
America.
Yes. So I had another slogan, make America atoms great again. Anyway, we need a teamwork. Whether you like Mr. Trump or might not like Mr. Trump, we should work together to implement the nuclear power plant. The real essence of that kind of system requires standardization and repetition. Our nuclear power plant may be complicated. That's not good. We should have a simple but safe system. And we should repeat to introduce the real electron generators within time. That's the most important thing. Still, we cannot do how to solve that kind of issue at this moment. Yes. Oh, all is backward.
The down arrow.
Yes. So if we would like to really implement the best approach between United States and South Korea, we should consider all the spectrums of our advantages and disadvantages. South Korea might be good for the EPCM work, engineering, construction, procurement, and manufacturing or management. But we are not so good at financing. Also, we do not know about geopolitics in the world. We'd like to penetrate in the global market for the AI industry. Many wealthy Middle East countries would like to construct hyperscaler AI data center in their territories. That's the pure bright market for the United States and South Korea, if we can make a good success. But it requires a lot of effort. At this moment, quite sadly, we are still facing the debate what kind of nuclear power plant we'd like to build in the global market, AP1000 or APL 1400, without asking our real client, customers. What's the real demand from the customers? We should build the reactor as early as possible. That must be the number one question that we should ask to everybody to shorten the construction time. Then it can really attract our big customers, hyperscalers. Did you ask that question to the real customer? Did you? Well, we are in the same small circle. We never ask those kind of systems to the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, and the real owner of the hyperscalers. If we'd like to survive the nuclear energy option as a team, that's the critical quest that we should work together. Also, we should know what's the real importance of the supply chain. I understand many of you recognize the name of the Doosan Ability or Doosan. They are very good. But you have to understand the real picture. There are a lot of sister companies just around the Doosan Ability. Without that kind of a cluster of the supply chain system, you cannot really build nuclear power plant on time. Florence, how many sister companies do you need to support the Doosan Ability supply chain?
3,000.
Your scale is too big. So, in reality, they have nowadays around 424 sister companies. So it's like real human creatures or any kind of living animals in the world. They need a teamwork. Only one company cannot deliver everything on time. So how to recreate that kind of supply chain in the United States, working with the Doosan Ability, will be the critical factor. It will require not just money, but all kind of human education. It's very challenging. And if you really would like to save the money and the construction cost with the South Korean companies for large-scale fleet of the nuclear power plant, we should think about this kind of basic nature of the supply chain. So, as Mr. Trump already mentioned, US would like to build 10 large-scale reactors by 2030. We are already behind the schedule. But still, we have to work hard. Probably, if we work very hard, then within 7 years or 6 years, we can finish construction of the large-scale reactors in the United States. So we should understand what's the real demand and how we can actually implement the supply chain. So if you try to build one reactor, single reactor in the United States, you don't have to worry about the supply chain in the United States. But if you'd like to build more than 10 or 20 to meet the big demand from the hyperscalers, then both South Koreans and the United States people should think about how we can actually introduce the real supply chain with the active environment of sustainability. So this kind of fact finding is the first step if we would like to make a big success. We should sit together and discuss what's the real benefit of the Westinghouse AP1000, what's the real benefit of the Korean APR 1400, and what's the benefit of all the financial industry in this country, and how we can maximally use those systems to support our future nuclear energy. We talk already a lot about the nature of the uncertainty. Uncertainty always creates issues. Our mission is how to do the mission of the reliability and risk assessment to minimize any kind of risk. So for that one, actually, it's time to start the real fact-finding with a real expert.
Excellent. I think we can transition on to where this fact-finding can come from, and before we have enough time for audience questions as well. And we'll get to the final part of your presentation through the end of it.
Yes.
And regarding cooperation, I do just want to point out a few pieces of recent news that have come out in terms of this. On January 21st, there was an announcement between Hyundai E&C and Fermi America for the construction of 4 large-scale nuclear plant reactors in the United States. And then similarly, going from U.S. to Korea, on December 3rd, President Lee Jae-myung of Korea said that the United States agreed to form a joint venture for the U.S. to help Korea secure nuclear enriched uranium for power plants, where it currently imports roughly 30% from Russia. And then beyond that, everybody has heard of this Stargate initiative in the United States, and Samsung and SK Hynix, I believe, have agreed to provide memory chips for this. Although not quite related to nuclear, there's a lot of speculation about to what extent small modular reactor SMR development will take place within this project. So I think these are all exciting things to think about. Before we get back to some of your final thoughts, I'd maybe just like to turn it back to Jackie. So Jackie, first of all, maybe could you answer what is the Capitol Hill view of all of this, given that you're in government relations and for nuclear development in the United States? And then moreover, on May 23rd, there were a number of executive orders that came out by the White House, mainly for reducing the number of permits for nuclear development. So what does that look like?
Well, I think on the whole, as I kind of referenced, there's a lot of support. And on Capitol Hill, it's I'd call it bipartisan support. It's a learning lesson over the years. I feel like I've been at this too long, where I've come from outright partisanship on whether they supported it or not, and then addressing the climate and the clean aspects. It kind of won over some of the Democrats. Now with the AI, it's made it almost bipartisanship. There's almost a rush to get somehow involved. Every member, every staffer is like, my boss wants to introduce this or that, which is great, but it's sometimes there's such a thing as you can't always be helpful. So I think that there's definitely a bipartisan sense. At the last Energy and Commerce hearing that I attended maybe a week ago, every Democratic member prefaced their remarks with how important nuclear is to AI and to winning the AI race. Then they went on to attack President Trump, essentially. I mean, they're not going to, at this particular moment, it was about his effort to move too fast and to Bigfoot the NRC, and they don't want DOE, and nobody wants, even as the regulatee, like we're regulated by the NRC, we're not going to survive unless there's a public perception of a very strong, transparent regulator. And we recognize that. And I can tell you stories all day long about how we're going to pay, 1,000 times more for the same screw that somebody else is. But if that's the way it is, we need that public perception. So we're not against the NRC by any means. But that happened to be the issue of the day. The Democrats are not going to say Trump's doing a great job. They're just not, but they're going to have a caveat. So that was the issue there. And I feel like it's going to move around. They're always going to have something to say, to caveat. But the bottom line is that they're supporting nuclear for AI, and that they're recognizing there's a value to nuclear power, and that it is clean, and that it is reliable. We're still going to have that argument over whether dispatchable renewables can really fill the role. But I'm sure everybody in this room knows that what a hyperscaler is going to need is not going to be something that shuts down when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. So we need a baseload energy source that is clean. So really, we've won over the Democrats for that. They don't want to admit it all the time. So I'd say that that's been very helpful. The administration itself, love them or hate them, or just kind of want to close your eyes and wait the next several years. He's made it. He's taken a lot of actions. You referenced the executive orders back in May, where he came out with 4 executive orders that will be helpful. Some of them may be aspirational, call it what you may, but they're definitely sending a signal to the public, to the markets, that the country and the government is behind this, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, to some extent, or until they're not. But I'm sorry, I'm trying not to just display my own personal views. But they're definitely signaling that nuclear is integral to the answer for AI. So that's been very helpful. I can't really fault the administration for their actions. I can't fault the administration. Maybe running a little too fast, a little too hard. Because like I said, we do need a transparent and trustworthy regulator. But does that answer your question, Tom? I'm sorry.
I think we can agree that this is more or less a bipartisan issue, and that there's a lot of interest in the White House right now to reduce red tape for building this out, and to make permitting a little bit easier for companies wishing to be involved in this. And for Dr. Huang,
Yes.
I know one of the questions we do have for you is basically, what is this going to look like into the future? Particularly, we know that there is the net zero commitment for 2050 in both the United States and Korea, although we're not sure where we're at with that in the United States. We have Vision 2030 up there. But first, Dr. Huang, in a word, could you talk about why AI uses nuclear energy in particular, as opposed to maybe other fuel sources, for example, liquefied natural gas, oil, coal? What makes nuclear so special?
Yeah, I think we already know that kind of answer. I just repeat what you are thinking of. We have to work on the supply and this consistent 24/7, 365 supply of the energy. Then probably coal-fired, gas-fired, and the nuclear power plant would be the answer. Also, for the future generation, we should worry about climate change, even though that's not a big issue at this moment in this country. So if you combine those 2 elements, then the nuclear should be the one of the best viable option for the future generation. That's the thing that we should always share among us. And to accomplish that mission, as already mentioned by you, we should work together actually, as stated by our national president Lee Jae-myung and Mr. Trump, that we first should secure the stable supply of the fresh fuel. I know that currently the dominant champion is the Rosatom in the Russian Federation. They are the best, in fact. But if you'd like to compete with Russia and China, we should work together very hard. Otherwise, we cannot compete with those two champions. They're really champions. For that matter, South Korea decided to invest $1 billion as in the form of offtake contract with Centrus last year. And we believe that that's not so good enough. So everybody nowadays talking about the bright future of the SMRs. Do they have enough stockpile of helium to support that kind of business? The answer? No. We should firstly secure the stable supply of helium or LEU++. That means the enrichment is around 10 to 13%. Those things are not just good for the SMRs, but it's very good for the nuclear non-proliferations. So if we have a high burn-up, then the percentage of the plutonium-239 would be lowered. So it would be the great weapon against the potential nuclear proliferations. So if we'd like to disseminate the nuclear fleet to the global society as a team, then we should secure how we can deliver the stable supply of the helium or LU++ or LU+. The real issue is, even though we have a bright picture, the real company like Centrus cannot trust the future. They are worrying about uncertainties. They are worrying that many prominent SMR companies might not be able to continuously work in the real society. So they do not spend their own money. But South Korea has a strong vision for the nuclear energy. So we are very ready to have a close cooperation with the United States on that matter. That will be the critical concept of our ongoing negotiation for the 123 agreement. So if you'd like to work on together, then we should worry about potential nuclear non-proliferation. So that should be one of the biggest issues coming on. So we are closely working on that issue with the US government and US Capitol Hill and all the think tank in the DC.
I guess I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that before I turn it back to Jackie again, which is, in Korean domestic politics, there's kind of been a back and forth between different administrations on the build-out of nuclear facilities and then the scaling back. So do we know where the Lee Jae-myung administration is at with that?
I have a new news from yesterday. Our government had a national poll to find out whether our general Korean society would like to support the nuclear energy. The definite answer is yes. So our government will accept that kind of thing and will go for the real implementation of the nuclear energy with a strong partnership with the United States. It's a free for all of us.
Excellent. So I expect there will be a lot to come out of that. So Jackie, I know we're talking about the energy needs for AI data centers, but I think this goes beyond just the nuclear power plants, and it also goes into the electric grid that services municipalities, but also the data centers themselves. So an interesting component to this for U.S.-Korea cooperation is that Korean electric power equipment companies have been, such as Hyosung and others, have played a big role in building out data centers. But specialized producers in electrical steel, POSCO, I think, just did an acquisition of one of the steel mills out in Ohio, which was a major producer of electrical steel for transformers. There could be cooperation in electricity grid development. So, Jackie, I just wanted to ask, what pressures do you think this type of scale-up is going to place on the current U.S. grid, and how do you think the U.S. is going to approach this?
That's a lot to unpack. There are a lot of pressures on the grid. Again, like I said, to meet supply and demand instantaneously, And the narrative that is really not just trickling, it's kind of racing to us now, is the affordability issue. That folks are saying that we're, mom and pop and residential customers, their rates are going up to basically build out for these hyperscalers, which is really not the case. But we do have to be mindful, and we're working to try and make sure that what we do maintains affordability for everybody. I mean, we're not a utility anymore, so nobody writes a check to us for their distribution, their transmission. A portion of it is for our generation, but we want to make sure that it is done in a way that is cognizant and conscious of end users that are regular people. Everything's affordability these days. So that narrative has really come in quick and hard, that we're trying to not combat it, but address it, frankly. And that's being taken care of at FERC, at the regional transmission organizations. They're coming up with some creative new ways to address these issues that are keeping us on our toes. So it's something we're going to have to keep addressing. And I'm not sure that answers your question, but affordability is something. And I wish I could sit here and say, oh, by the way, I figured it out. And I can tell you what my people, I can't, because it is so convoluted and complicated. We have suggestions, we have proposals, we have this and that. It doesn't mean that's how it's going to be, because it's got to go through all the various stakeholders, the different RTOs and FERC. But we spend a lot of time looking at that and trying to figure out how to best make the grid work. Obviously, supply chain is a separate issue that's also going to be a challenge.
Excellent. So before we get into the audience Q&A, that leads into my next question, which is basically the biggest challenges for AI power demands, both in the United States and Korea, and what you think the solutions available are. So maybe, Dr. Huang, would you mind letting us know what you think the solutions are here?
Yes. As I already mentioned to you, we should know the real demand, and we should have a fact-finding so that we can find the real basis to work together as a real team. Unless we are doing the fact-finding, we are always thinking about what kind of brand we should work together. Some people can say we should work on AP1000. Some people say we should work APR1400. Those brand names are not so important. For all of us, what we should do as a team is how we can deliver something within short time period. So that's the thing that we should work together very, very seriously to meet the real demand from hyperscalers somehow in this room. So you should deliver that kind of message to your hyperscalers.
Any explanation for
yes.
how it works like a symphony?
Yes. So we are now trying to run the New York Philharmonic. So in order to run the New York Philharmonic, you should have a good musical scores like Symphony 9. And you should have a very talented conductor like Karajan. And you should have a first violinist like Dusan and Ability. And first cellist, Hyundai Construction Company or Bechtel. So we should integrate all these components together as one team. We definitely need bilateral cooperation between United and South Korea. So whenever I talk in DC, I always prepare this kind of slide, Team Nuclear Chorus. So we are trying to learn the real innovative symphony with the speed of not ordinary turtles, but the speed of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
My favorite analogy right there.
Yes.
So, Jackie, maybe what do you think the biggest challenges are for AI power demands in the United States, and what do you think the best solution available is?
Well, if I had the solution, I'd be making a lot more money than I am right now. I think the biggest challenge is, like I mentioned, I think it's going to be this narrative about affordability and making sure that this is done reliably, that the hyperscalers, and we need to do it with speed. we're facing challenges. There's a lot of talk. We have a lot of support from the right policymakers, stakeholders, but nothing moves quickly in the U.S. I mean, it's as simple as that. So that's going to be our challenge, is doing it quickly and doing it at scale while maintaining affordability for regular customers. And I think, the impending election is definitely a factor on how people are thinking about we saw it in the 2025 election in New Jersey and Virginia, with affordability being such a big topic for the governor's races. I think, we're in a race, but we're in a race with maybe sometimes one leg or one arm tied behind our back. So, we're just it's all a give and take. Do you want to give up what it is that makes us the United States? We don't want to have a state government sponsored industry. We want to be able to do it ourselves. So I think I don't have an answer to it, but it's something that we will continue to work. And I think partnerships and working with other countries, other parts of the supply chain, other parts of industry, it's a problem bigger than any individual. So, but I do have confidence that we'll get there. I mean, I'm generally a pessimist by nature, but I think this is something so important that we're going to figure out. There are a lot of smart people working on this right now.
That's very assuring to hear.
Well, that doesn't really matter. It's just coming from me, but
with nuclear power, you want smart people on it, I think. So how about some audience questions? We have 15 minutes. Oh, sure.
I'd like to show this animation. My neighbor Totoro. Actually, I visited Nagoya to join the Totoro Park in Nagoya. Have you ever visited Totoro Park near Nagoya in Japan? You should go to understand the same vision of the proliferation resistance and the physical protection. That's the thing that we should enhance if we'd like to penetrate in the Middle East market or African market as a team between United States and South Korea. Also, as I already mentioned to you, we should understand the need of our partners throughout the fact-finding. And we have to identify the proper mechanism to work together. For that one, we definitely enhance the mutual trust and the good participation for our future generations. So that's the 5 messages that I learned from Nagoya Totoro Park last week with my wife.
That's almost as good as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle allegory. So
maybe.
Great. All right. So we've got a few questions in the audience. Maybe let's start with the back left there. We got a microphone coming. And please introduce yourself and your affiliation, please.
Yes, Andy Patterson, U.S. Nuclear Industry Council, and now Dr. Wang, a member of the chorus. Happy to be in it. So, Jackie, we're curious with data centers, AI, talk about 50, 80 gigawatts, but these companies are not going to manage the reactors. Some may own them. We're curious how much activity you're seeing. We know Duke is being contacted to manage reactors you don't own. In other words, taking a management contract in an overall deal for SMRs that are going to power data centers. Management is a key issue, and you guys are number 1 in the country.
well, thank you for that recognition. And I will be honest, I can't speak to it with a whole lot of knowledge that I'm allowed to share. A lot of that is, I like to say, black box with the hyperscalers. Whoa, what? I'd like to see more hyperscalers out helping us out. Like you said, there's nobody here in the room helping us out on the Hill and helping us out defending against some of these concerns that are coming up around affordability and such. But that's just my own pet peeve. I don't really think that I can answer your question, mostly because I don't know, but also because I couldn't say.
Our view is it has to happen, that they're not going to manage.
Oh, of course not. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and we've always, we have not made any, it's not a secret that we'd love to manage. We sell our management model for a lot of money. That is where we shine. We know how to manage these things. We've taken what was in the past kind of some crappy sites and crappy places and turned them around before my time. But yes, we would be very happy to manage them. And that's probably where it's going to have to go, because we can't invest the money on our own without some sort of partnership. Like I said, we're competitive markets. The risk is entirely on us. Our board's not going to just write a check for building a brand new site somewhere.
You don't need to anymore.
Well, yes, if we can get partners, and it's as evidenced by by Crane. They came in and Microsoft was willing to pay a premium, sign a power purchase agreement. So I think these are some of the creative ideas that our origination team are really looking at, and we'll do whatever the customer wants is basically what we're working with. We're working with them to find a solution that's going to suit their needs that we can provide. So thank you for the question.
Other questions? We've got Kayla Order over there.
Thank you. My name is Kayla Orta. I'm affiliated with Atlantic Council, Korea specialist by trade, but working in the nuclear field as well. So I wanted to pull back to something that came up in the first panel we didn't quite have time for, and that is the wonderful buzzword SMRs. And the reason I think it'd be interesting to hear from both of your perspectives, if I've heard, if we look at the global perspective on SMR designs, the U.S. is actually one of the main leading nations. I believe about 30% of current SMR reactor designs are U.S. company or U.S. company led, but those are designs in PowerPoints, not in actuality. So I'd be curious to hear about the U.S. perspective on this. And then also from the South Korea side, I know there's a lot of energy about thinking and envisioning Doosan Enerbility acting almost as an SMR foundry. So taking that kind of Taiwan model and being able to build it out. I've been hearing this with a lot of excitement, but I'm curious if this is actually going to come to the forefront. So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more about small modular reactors. Thank you.
Yeah. I have worked on the SMR business for more than 40 years, actually. So SMR is a very old technology from the middle of 1950s. So, but there is another principle, economy of the scale. So that's the reason why we'd like to build large reactors. So in that sense, it's better to continuously construct large-scale LWRs. If you just would like to produce the electricity, it might be cheap if you can shorten the construction time period. However, there might be another big demand. Today, we just decided just to talk about one subject, AI industry. But there are a lot of different industry in the world which requires additional electrons, like chemical engineering, petroleum companies, like Dow Chemical or other things. They need a so-called clean steam, which we definitely need. So if we have a good SMRs, which can both supply electricity with clean steam, then we should support that kind of SMR with all our support. There might be one big concern. Some of the design of the very specific SMRs might be good for the United States, but might not so be good for the non-nuclear weapon state. So we should be very careful how we can control the so-called ENR, enrichment and reprocessing. So that's the thing that we should talk together as a team. We already did once throughout the GNET, and we had a lot of debate at that time. We couldn't solve that issue at that time. But nowadays, we definitely need new fleet of SMRs for both steam and electricity or any kind of district heating that the Finnish are now talking about. For the mission, we need a real fact-finding, and we should support some good candidate of SMRs without joint effort.
Another question over here.
Thank you very much. Robert Eichhorn from the Atlantic Council. You mentioned Korea's effort to try to reduce dependence on Russian fuel.
Yes.
And obviously, we have a target in the U.S. of trying to reach that by 2028. And I was wondering, anything further on the Korea side, and from Constellation, how are you looking at that? Is that something that you see as possible in terms of diversification or domestic production? There's a lot going on in the U.S., but is it going to be enough to get there by 2028?
I can give you Jackie's understanding of my position, of our company, that we enjoy economies of scale, that we are the largest, that we have a phenomenal team of fuel purchasers who have enjoyed very strong relationships over a long, long time. So we are okay, which is not, I guess, I hope there are no investors listening. I mean, we're in a good position for right now, for the short term. We've managed to, have enough contract in place. Again, not stuff that I'm allowed to know or talk about really, but it is a concern. It is something that should be everybody's concern. And frankly, even if I feel like my company is going to be okay, the industry needs to be okay. I mean, we're going to hang together, or we're going to, die alone, die together. So it is definitely a concern. I can't speak to, what other companies in the enrichment space are able to do. It's good to see some monies being given. We would be supportive of that. That's not something I'm out there actively, lobbying for, like, hey, give more money to this or that. There has, accident-tolerant fuel, for instance. I did several years ago spend some time working on that. We are part of an ecosystem where it's important, and that it's existential to us. But I can't really speak to what I see other than just trying to combat my natural pessimism. But I know that it is something that the industry as a whole is really concerned about, and we would love to see how it works itself out. And other than just trying to have that, oh my gosh, when we get to that deadline and we're about to shut the government down, for instance, somebody's going to figure out a solution at the last minute. I don't know. That seems to be how the government works. But yeah, I can't see that they will let us run out of gas, so to say. Although I will say, last night I did drive home with the light on saying I had 0 miles left. And I was like, whoa, how did I do this? So, yeah.
It's the technology these days. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question.
No.
I'm sorry.
So
Sorry,
for South
Doctor.
Korea, it's a big issue, actually. We still have some remaining long-term contract with Rosatom at this moment, but we never renewed the new contract with Rosatom. There is another competitor, China. CNNC would like to penetrate into the Korean market very, very aggressively. And their price tag is very, very low. So you have two enemies, not enemies, competitors, politely. You have to find out how we can actually create the solid partnership. So that's the reason why South Korean government would like to work on the renegotiation of 123 agreement to persuade our general public. Our government would like to work with the United States to revive the U.S. uranium enrichment supply chain. But your price tag, I should say very, very politely, is very expensive. Like this. So we should have some kind of political motivation. So in that sense, the upcoming 123 agreement negotiation would be critical. We definitely would like to support the U.S. strong will, to have independence of the stable and freely supply of the LEU in the global market.
Our panelists, I believe, well, they've done a great job, and I think some of them may be able to stick around to answer some questions. So thank you very much for speaking. We're going to turn it over to Ms. Lo Lee to introduce our lunchtime speakers. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's most important thing, to have a lunch.
I know it's past the lunchtime, but Just hold on for a little while. Our luncheon speaker is Latif Numari. He is the energy regulator matter at the American Public Power Association. Last year, GABI did a series of workshops with Pillsbury Winthrop law firm with Ford on these very topics. And Latif was one of the first speakers. And he brings very interesting perspective, intersection of law, engineering, and his energy policy background. And you can read his bios. So because of a large demand, I'm eager to invite him back to our podium for enlightening us with more information. Oh, sorry. For logistically, after Latif's discussion, we will break up for lunch, and you can ask him informal questions during lunch. And you're going to stay around, right?
Oh,
yeah. So.
Thank you, Florence. And thanks to GABI and the KEI for inviting me and the American Public Power Association to share some thoughts with you. I'm well aware that I'm standing between you and lunch. So I will keep my thoughts short. But what I wanted to talk to you about was partnership. That is the theme I think we have heard about all morning. And I want to talk to you about why community-owned not-for-profit utilities are a great partner for developing nuclear in this country. What we heard this morning from all the panelists is that AI is driving extraordinary increases in demand for electricity. And that over the next 10 to 20 years, nuclear can be a big part of the solution. But that there are a lot of challenges, right? You need to have access to capital. You need to have secure and efficient supply chains. You need to manage risk and then allocate that risk appropriately. You need regulatory structures that are appropriate and efficient. And what we didn't hear as much about this morning, but I think is very important, you need community support. Putting nuclear into a community requires the support of the community. If you don't have it, you will face opposition and lawsuits like you would not believe. Nobody can do this alone. I think is the theme of the morning is no one entity can pull this off on their own. You need to have partners. And I come to you from an organization that represents a particular community of electric utilities in the United States. And because I think most of you don't know much about public power, I want to share with you a little bit about how the utility industry is structured in this country, where public power fits in there, and then talk to you about why that structural advantage makes us a great partner. So most utilities in this country are investor-owned utilities, right? They earn a profit on the wires and substations and generating facilities that they bring to the grid. In most parts of the country, their profits are regulated by a state regulator. But investors, historically, as they started building out the grid, didn't always want to serve all parts of the country. They wanted to serve parts of the country that were more profitable. So many rural parts of the country were simply not served by investor-owned utilities. And so there emerged a group of utilities, farmers, typically ranchers, who came together, formed cooperatives to build out their own electricity. And they got funding from the federal government and low-cost debt. So that sector of the electric industry is known as the cooperative utilities. They serve about 15% of the country, of country's load, although I think more than half of the country's landmass served by cooperatives. And then there were communities that thought this new technology, electricity, is going to be really important. And that we don't want it to be in the hands of Wall Street. We want Main Street to own this new technology, this new electric light bulb that Edison brought to their communities. And so these communities decided they would start their own utilities. They would own it themselves. And there are today 2,000 communities across the country in 49 states that own their own utilities. They are not for profit. Their owners are their customers, and they're governed by their city councils or various boards that are appointed by mayors or elected by the people. We have big cities like Los Angeles and Seattle, but we have mostly small cities. Communities like Berea, Kentucky is a public power community. And because most of our communities are small, they often come together through joint action, through partnership amongst communities to buy power together. Right? So we have these joint action agencies in most states across the country. There is a joint action agency where all the communities that are not for profit come together and buy power together. And this model of local ownership, of not for profit, of access to low cost debt, because municipal debt is not taxable in this country. Federally not taxable. So access to low-cost debt, community ownership, not-for-profit business model, and a long-term view, right? These communities are not disappearing. They're not companies that could go bankrupt tomorrow. These communities will exist, I hope, forever into the future, right? We have a long-term view on investment and this idea of joint action. Combined, make us well-suited for the kind of long-term investment and community support that is needed to get nuclear power built in this country. Right? And so I'll give you a couple examples. We look at some of the most recent nuclear power plants to be brought online in this country are Vogtle units 3 and 4 in Georgia. Right? Georgia Power is the majority owner and developer of that project, but a quarter of that project, a quarter of Vogtle units 3 and 4, is owned by the Municipal Energy Agency of Georgia, MEAG. MEAG is a group of 49 cities, not-for-profit utilities in Georgia, and they own a quarter of that utility. You all probably know the story that as Vogtle units 3 and 4 were being developed, there were cost overruns, there were delays in development, and there was a bankruptcy in between, and it was hard to get built. It could have been canceled, right? It turns out that the participation of MEAG, the 50 not-for-profit communities in Georgia, their participation and commitment to getting these projects done was an integral part in overcoming all of the barriers that were faced, right? Today, they stand out as the jewels of the American nuclear industry, right? In large part because you had community support and this not-for-profit business model participating, right? This is still happening going forward. I can tell you from our community, these 2,000 communities across the country, the interest in nuclear has never been higher. Right? Think about the Pacific Northwest. In the state of Washington, there's 29 communities that have formed together to form Energy Northwest. Right? Energy Northwest owns the Columbia Generating Station, nuclear station in Washington State. And Energy Northwest has now announced a partnership with X-Energy to build out a new facility, the Cascade Advanced Energy Facility, to build out SMRs. Right? This is going to be this kind of partnership, right? With a group of cities who already own nuclear. They already like nuclear, and in a place where they are serving massive amounts of data centers. You all know that Microsoft is based in Washington State, right? Google has been and Amazon have been installing data centers in Washington State for decades now. These are communities that know about data centers. They understand nuclear. They understand these new customers because they've been working with them for a long time. And these communities have come together and said, we're going to partner with X Energy and we're going to build SMRs. Right? That kind of innovation, of business models coming together, of partnering, is essential to getting nuclear built. And I think an example of Energy Northwest doing this in progressive communities that are excited about this new technology is a model for many other parts of the country where we want to get nuclear built. There's other examples too. You can look to the state of New York. The New York Power Authority is a public power entity. Their plans to build 1 gigawatt of small modular nuclears. We have Santee Cooper in South Carolina. They had the VC Andrew? No, that's not the right. VC Summer, right? VC Summer plant. They're talking about restarting that. So there's lots of public power communities that are thinking about both large nuclear and small modular. And I think this is an exciting time for our entire industry. But having public power as a partner, whenever any of you are thinking about how do we get things built, think about communities that can help you make this happen. So I will end there and let you all get to lunch, but happy to take questions over food and talk more about how great public power is.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Latif, for that. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I want to, we have lunch served outside for participants so that you can continue your conversations. I want to just thank my staff at KEI for supporting this and also the GABI staff, and thank Florence for being such an excellent partner. And so meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for coming, and we look forward to a good lunch and to seeing you all again at another event. Thank you.